Good morning. I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for August 29th. My name is Jeremy Schroeder, and I'm the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Councilmember Ellison, Councilmember Reich, and Councilmember Goodman. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. We've got 6 items on today's agenda, including a public hearing and 2 quasi-judicial hearings, but we'll first dispense with the consent agenda. Item number 4 is a rezoning application submitted by Solomon's Porch for the property located 100 West 46th Street. Item number 5 is a rezoning application submitted by Dancing Bear Chocolate for their property located at 4367 Thomas Avenue North. And item number 6 is a street vacation application submitted by the Public Works Department. Is there any discussion on these items, or would any of my committee members like to pull anything off? Seeing nothing, I move items number 4 through 6. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. We'll now move to our public hearing, item number 1, which is a public hearing regarding the appointment of Adam Hutchins to the Zoning Board of Adjustments. I'll first open the public hearing. Is there anyone else? Is there anyone here to speak on item number 1? All right, not seeing anyone. I'm like, too late. I'm so sorry. Now, if you want to jump up and talk a little bit, that would be appreciated. I do get on a roll. I apologize.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. My name is Adam Hutchins. I'm looking to get on the Board of Adjustment, so I'll take any questions. I live in Minneapolis my whole life. We bought our first house in North Minneapolis. We're renovating it right now, little bit by little bit. I just want to contribute back to the city with my time. So,
great, thank you. Have a question from Councilmember Ellison?
Oh, not so much a question.
Comment.
Yeah, just wanted to thank you for offering your service to the city, and thank you for living in Ward 5 on the north side. And it was great to meet you. You stopped by my open office hours, and we had a good conversation there. So good to see this coming up on the agenda. So
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. I want to echo Councilman Ellison's thanks just for giving service to the city. And if there isn't anything else.
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming today. All right, not seeing anybody else. The hearing is now closed. With that, I will move item 1 for approval. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Item number 2 is the consideration of an appeal submitted by Larkin Hoffman regarding the Board of Adjustment's decision to deny a variance for a curb cut at 5420 Colfax Avenue South, and we'll begin with the staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Schroeder, council members. As you mentioned, the matter at hand is an appeal of the decision of the Zoning Board of Adjustment to deny a variance to permit a curb cut where a property is served by alley access. The property in question is 5420 Colfax Avenue South. As a bit of background on the property, was first identified when the applicant came in for a building permit to construct a garage through the Minneapolis Development Review Calendar, the Public Service Center. At that point, it was identified that a variance would be required. I then was assigned to work on the project and met with the applicant. Several weeks later, they applied for a building permit to construct a retaining wall replacement. The retaining wall that was built was a little bit different than the retaining wall that had been there prior, but was still within the confines of the zoning ordinance. So the retaining wall that had been built is a permitted development of the property. On the 21st of June, the applicant had a complete application to administratively increase the height of a garage, which is an application where you can exceed the height of the midpoint of a garage as long as it matches the cladding material and the roof pitch of the house, and the wall height of the garage does not exceed 10 feet. That was approved on the 27th of June, at which point it was deemed complete that the variance could proceed. The variance hearing took place on the 25th of July. Staff and the board were unable to make finding number 1 in large part due to the existence of a one-stall garage, which has since been demolished. The one-stall garage that had been there was accessed off of the alley, as are all of the other properties on this block. The grade change that exists on the site does affect many parcels on this block and throughout the city of Minneapolis. Staff and the board were also unable to make the second finding, which is that the request is in compliance with the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan. The zoning ordinance states that direct access to the street shall not be permitted where an alley serves a single or two-family dwelling, except where such curb cut extends into a corner side or reverse corner side yard. The policies of the comprehensive plan echo this, with the intent to preserve sidewalk connectivity, to promote pedestrian safety, and to reduce hard cover on properties. Staff and the board were also unable to make a complete third finding, which is that the variance not alter the essential character of the locality or present a safety hazard or a hazard to health, safety, or welfare. Staff and the board were able to find that the variance would not alter the essential character of the locality, but found that it may present a safety hazard, being the only curb cut on the block would be an unanticipated maneuver to have a car coming from a lot onto the street. Staff's recommendation is for this committee to deny the appeal and to uphold the board's decision.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Also like the record to reflect that we have been joined by the council president and Councilmember Gordon. All right, thank you. At this point, I'll open the hearing, and I'll first give the applicant, the opportunity to speak to the committee. The appellant or representative have time to speak. Thank you. If you could say your name and address for the record.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Schroeder. My name is Jacob Steen with Larkin Hoffman Attorneys. 8300 Norman Center Drive is my address. And I represent John and Stephanie Nichols. As staff has indicated, the Nichols are seeking a variance. They're seeking access from Colfax Avenue due to the grade change from the alley to the back of their lot. And of course, that requires a curb cut. And I won't go into all the findings that we've described in detail in our appeal, but we do believe that there are practical difficulties present here. The Nichols have lived in this neighborhood for nearly 40 years, and about a year ago, they moved a couple blocks over to this house as their forever home, as the home that they plan to retire in. And they quickly realized, as they were assessing the property, that the 70-year-old retaining wall that is effectively holding up the alley and holding up the garage and holding up the driveway was failing, and that they had to quickly replace that. As they were looking at how that was going to need to be replaced, they also confirmed that there was a pretty precarious maneuvering situation at the top of that retaining wall, because in order to back out of that garage, you're skirting the top of that 8-foot retaining wall. So if they were to rebuild that wall in the current location and with the current arrangement, they were going to have to bring in a substantial amount of compacted and engineered soil that would dramatically impact the design of that, essentially expand that retaining wall further into their yard. As they looked at those designs, that would result into a pretty significant looming tower over the adjacent property. I think it's about 2 feet from the property line. The resulting garage would be pretty detrimental to access to light and air for that property to the north. But the second issue that quickly arose was related to accessibility. And I'll show you the picture here of what we'll call the existing pre-conditions. And it's a little bit difficult to tell, but that is the stairway from the alley to the backyard. Now, as you can tell, that retaining wall was built on top of a berm that ramped up to the alley. As I mentioned, this is going to be the Nichols' forever home. They wanted to live here and retire here and grow old here. But getting from the yard to the alley required 14 steps, and even fully able-bodied in a Minnesota winter, 14 steps outdoors is a challenge. And they looked at what it would be to retrofit, what it would take to retrofit as they look towards growing old here. And I won't get into the medical details, but we do anticipate that at some point in the future, we're going to need an accessibility ramp. So that was a major consideration. And given the height of this wall, this ramp and the minimum grades, or the maximum grade of an accessibility ramp, would need to be over 120 feet long. So that's either the entire length of the property or, a dozen switchbacks occupying most of that backyard. I suppose another alternative would have been an elevator or a lift, which again is going to be a pretty significant undertaking for a single-family home. They would have to build an enclosure, and that's just an unduly burdensome cost. So we look to what is the most reasonable alternative here. And given that this lot is actually 1.5 lots wide, it's got an extra 20 feet than any other lot on the block, or there might be 2 that are similarly situated. The easiest and most sensible approach would be to take access off of the street, to build a detached garage facing the street and get a curb cut. So we began down that route, and we began working with the city. And as staff indicated, that's when we had a little bit of a procedural snafu, or an ordering phasing snafu. Because this request is further complicated by the fact that by the time the variance was denied, the building permit for the retaining wall was already approved and the retaining wall was constructed. And as staff indicated, the administrative increase for the garage that is yet to be built was approved. So while the Nichols absolutely understand that that alone does not constitute a variance, they, having never been through this process before, believed that it was at least implied that these would be, given that these were permitted, that these would be supported, that this variance would be supported, and that staff would likely support it, or at least it would be a procedural necessity, but a foregone conclusion. Now, I understand, having been a city planner and having been a land use attorney, that that's not how it works. But I don't think it's fair to expect that they hire an attorney up front or have knowledge that a standard person would not. So if they're denied, unfortunately, because of the phasing of these conditions, we would have to either move or remove this $35,000 retaining wall that they've already installed in their yard. And that would still not address our forthcoming accessibility issue that will be, we anticipate, a distinct need in the future. So we believe that there are clear practical difficulties, as are laid out in our appeal, that exist, and that this is not a precedent-setting variance. This is a very unique situation. It's unfortunate that we've had these mix-ups with the permits, and we were here seeking approval of this appeal and approval of this variance.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How is this lot different than any of the other lots on the alley or next door in either direction? Aren't they all at the same grade?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Goodman, there are, interestingly enough, looking at the plat, there are 3 lots in the center of the alley that do have these significant grade changes. And those are the 3 lots on the block that have a 1.5 foot or 1.5 wide lot. And we believe the intent was because there was an acknowledgement that you really can't, you'd have to back a car off a hill to get down to this lot. So there's really only 3 lots on this alley that have significant grade changes. This is the most significant of all 3 in terms of grade changes. And if you look at the staff report, there is a topographical map that does indicate that. So this is a very unique situation, and even the adjacent properties are not affected in the same manner due to the grade changes over the block.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll now open up the hearing to members of the public who would like to speak, and please limit your comments to 2 minutes per person, which will be tracked at the timer by the clerk. Would any member of the public like to speak? Anyone interested in speaking? All right, not seeing anyone. The hearing is now closed. I'd open it up for discussion. I can't tell if you're adjusting, or I can jump in if that's fine, or Councilmember Goodman.
I don't love this. I think it's a terrible idea to have a curb cut mid-block on a residential street on Colfax. And I think that the fact that they did the work already shows a little bit of indifference that we're put in this terrible position of having to order them to take down a retaining wall. So it doesn't make me all that empathetic, to be honest. But I don't want to be the one to have to draw up any findings, because I have lots of constituents have to go more than 20 feet. All over Lake of the Isles and Cedar Lake, there are big grade differences, and you should know that when you buy the house. On the flip side, I'm not enthusiastic about making them tear down that giant wall. And I feel like we're being backed into a corner, and I don't appreciate it. I guess I'll say that.
I think I'd second that. I mean, it is something that it's very clear in the law, which I take to heart. The comment that, not every person is an attorney or should have to do that with their property, but it's there for a reason. Like if there are real impediments and someone is put them up, like it puts the city to, like that's the whole point of the zoning code. We're not going to be held victim to if somebody builds builds a wall, builds a moat, builds something that makes it very difficult. That said, I very much agree with Councilmember Goodman. I'm very empathetic that I don't like having to put down the wall. So I think that we need to think about some way to be able to explain the process a little bit better so people know.
Mr. Chair, and I think it was borne out by the testimony, but just for everybody's operating the same set of facts. This isn't a situation where the wall was built without a permit. They did get approval from the city to build it.
Completely, but I think that there's things you can do to your property and get a permit for, and if you don't inform the city that you're going to eventually need a curb cut or need something else, that makes it very difficult for all parties involved. Councilmember Goodman.
I'm just wondering, because the applicant did not get up and speak, which I would have done if I were you, and explain to us how you could build a $35,000 retaining wall without thinking that you knew you couldn't put a garage in did you think a curb cut would be cool and everyone would be good with that, or what was your thinking? I mean, I don't understand how we'd get to issuing a building permit, that's fine. But the city probably thought, good for you, you're not going to build a garage. And that's the direction we're moving in, which is less cars, less garages, less curb cuts. So maybe you could just explain your thinking in that once you built that retaining wall, you knew you couldn't do a garage. Were you just like thinking, okay, they're going to let us do a curb cut, it's no big deal? I mean, you could hear we're pretty empathetic, so can you get up and make your case?
Yeah, please come up. And thank you for coming down tonight.
So my name's John Nichols, and I'm the property owner. And this is all very confusing for us, obviously. And the reason that we put up the wall is because we thought we were doing what was required. So, and we got a permit for it. Originally, we'd applied for an application in May for a garage with a curb cut. At that time, we believed that we provided enough information for a curb cut. It wasn't until we heard from the planning department that it required a variance, which we didn't know at the time. So by the time we had applied for the wall, which at the same time had a site plan with a proposed garage on it, so it wasn't like they didn't know. And so we thought we were doing each piece to bring us to where we wanted to be with the property. And frankly, we had no idea it would turn into this. Had we known these things, or had someone, been able to inform the process as it was being done, the wall permit was on June 10th, which was before they accepted the land use application as complete. So again, we're just trying to do the best we can. Thank you.
Councilmember Gordon.
I'm prepared to move that we grant the appeal. I know that this is a big mess, but I think there are definitely practical difficulties with the grade situation here, and they made the case particularly in the winter. They're more difficult than the neighboring properties and others, and I think it's the unique circumstances to the property, which is what I would base my findings on moving forward with this.
Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments would echo what everyone has said so far. I did want to reflect that a lot of the same sentiments were part of the zoning board of adjustment discussion as well, where that board was struggling with the same frustration. And I think they did highlight there really that, excuse me, there did seem to be some miscommunication or issues with the staffing piece of it. So I don't know that that really had come forward. But the ZBA did talk about a couple of other examples they've seen over the years where different parts, different staff in different areas of the department are reviewing just one piece instead of the holistic application. So it seems like there's some process things to work out. I'm also very torn. I think the findings, the first part of the findings is the practical difficulties one. I think if you consider the fact that the wall is there now, that along with the elevation change, that would satisfy the finding number one. The second required finding is about consistency with our city's policies and plans. And I think you could make the case that, you certainly could make the case that having a curb cut onto a residential street is not consistent with a lot of pieces of our policies, including pedestrian safety. But I think there are other things to talk about, our goals of people being able to stay in their community and age in place, and the accessibility issues that were created by this grade change even before the wall was there. So I think on that one, there's a way to for the findings to be consistent with our comprehensive plan and other city policies.
Councilmember Ellison.
So I was trying to find this, see if this information was in my packet, but for the other larger lots on the block, what is the grade change if staff could, just so we, just so we kind of are operating with that information. Okay, so that should.
Put it up here and. Yeah. So it's these three lots right here.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones with the most significant grade change. And if you go out there, you'll see that they have the biggest change, biggest drop from the alley to the lot.
Do we know the number of feet? I'm only asking just because, as we sort of consider making this, granting this, other folks could make the case, and next thing you know, we have 3 on the block, and I know that's all hypothetical, but still.
Chair Schroeder, Councilmember Ellison, there are elevation contours on here. They're very, very small, but this line here represents an elevation of 884, and this line here is 890. So total of 6 feet as measured by these contour lines, and then there's an existing another 2-foot line right here. So a total of 8 feet between those lines.
I have one kind of question. I'm leaning against supporting the motion. My main concern is the precedent that this would set. That I completely believe in this situation that this was all in good faith, that the wall was built, but understand it's not even about this property. It's about all the properties coming forward. So if maybe if the appellant wants to talk a little bit more about like why this would not, you mentioned that this would not be precedent setting, if you could kind of give some examples of how that would be.
Sure. Thanks, Chair Schroeder. So any variance by its very nature must be considered on these facts. And I believe the facts that are present here are largely relate to the fact that we have an existing retaining wall that was failing. We had a retaining wall that was going to be substantially rebuilt, and if that was going to be rebuilt, it was going to result in some major grade alterations that were going to be detrimental to the adjacent property, in part due to the adjacent property's similarly situated grade. So the adjacent property, and I don't have the photo, but just to the right here, the adjacent property will be approximately at the same level as this backyard, maybe 2 feet different. And if we were going to build a garage on top of that, that would result in pretty significant obstruction to light and air. And we believe that the confluence of those situations ultimately make this a unique situation. And ultimately, you know, I think if we would have gone through this process differently, you know, the circumstances might be a little bit different, but this is a very unique situation. I don't think that you'll see it occur again, hopefully.
Thank you. Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know Councilmember Gordon's motion implied instructing staff for findings, but I just wanted to make that explicit if it were to prevail.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm good with the motion. I understand the explanation. I am more concerned that someone's gonna like not realize that they're in an alley and then there's like a giant drop off. Is there a fence that's gonna be put up that is just not in the picture? Because I don't want to have like someone say, we're liable, we've allowed this weird thing, and then someone falls off. You don't want that either.
Right. There will be a fence. A fence is going to be constructed. There's also a berm and some landscaping, some plantings that were constructed on the top as a temporary measure, but a fence will also be forthcoming to make it clear that this isn't an exit.
Thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues? With that, Councilmember Gordon's motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. Finally, number 3 on our agenda is the consideration of an appeal submitted by Tim and Amy Egan regarding the Board of Adjustment's decision to deny a variance to reduce the required front yard setback at 3406 Benjamin Street Northeast. We'll begin with the staff presentation.
As stated, the application is for an appeal of the decision of the Zoning Board of Adjustment denying a variance request for a front yard setback. The applicant is proposing to construct a new carbon-neutral, accessible, single-family dwelling on the lot as part of a pilot program in which the city is a partner. The proposal has the roof line of the open front porch extending across a portion of the driveway and then back to the attached setback garage, creating a carport, a portion of which extends into the front yard setback, approximately 6 feet on the north side and 8 feet on the south side into the setback. Carport is not a permitted encroachment into required setback. The house was granted conditional approval on February 25th at the applicant's request in order to meet application deadlines for financing and things like that. There were several conditions of approval placed on the plans, and one of those called for the removal of this non-conforming carport. Most of those issues have been resolved. This issue has been not. And so after several months, the applicant decided to apply for a variance to try to keep this carport rather than remove it from the plans. Staff found that none of the 3 findings were met in full, and the Board of Adjustment upheld staff's recommendation. The first finding related to practical difficulties on the property not created by the applicant. The subject property does not have an alley, and so they are entitled to have a curb cut. And lack of an alley sometimes can constitute a practical difficulty, but staff found that it does not in this case. This property is nearly 20 feet wider than the minimum lot width for an R1 zone property that does not have alley access, and is nearly 4,300 square feet larger than the minimum lot area for an R1 zone property. The property is large enough and wide enough to allow design alternatives that would eliminate the need for the variance. The garage, the entire house could have been pushed back on the lot. The garage could have been detached with the carport taking the place of the garage, or the carport could be reduced or eliminated. In short, the need for the variance is driven by the design of the house, not by any unique characteristic of the property itself. The second finding talks about the reasonableness of the request, and also it meeting the spirit and intent of the ordinance and the comprehensive plan. Certainly constructing a new carbon neutral accessible house is both a reasonable use of the property and meets several comprehensive plan goals. However, inclusion of the carport, especially in the front yard setback, does not meet the spirit or intent of the ordinance, which is to limit or eliminate parking and vehicle-related structures at the front of the property, and instead to have them at the back of the property. So again, the spirit and intent of the ordinance is not being met. The final finding speaks to the meeting the character of the neighborhood and also potential impacts to life, safety, and welfare or use of other properties. This likely would not have any impact on health, safety, or welfare or anybody else's use of their property, but it would not be in keeping with the character of the area. There are several properties in the area that do have attached front-facing garages. Many others also have detached garages at the rear of the lot. No other property in the block has a carport, especially, and nothing in the front yard setbacks. So the third finding is not met in full. And so staff is recommending that this committee uphold the zoning board of adjustments decision and to deny the appeal.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
I just want clarity on the map, which is the, not that, the diagram, sorry, the site plan. Are we concerned about the orange part? Are they green in the orange part, or are they green in the orange and the purple part? I mean, what?
Sure. Chair Schroeder, Councilmember Gordon. So it is the orange part here that they're considering today. The green is the open covered front porch, which is a permitted encroachment. Okay. The purple is the portion of the carport that's located outside of the front yard setback.
Thank you. Yes, I thought. Just wanted to confirm.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you for the presentation. At this point, I'll open the hearing. I'll first give the appellant the opportunity to speak to the committee. Would the appellant or a representative like to speak? Yes. Well, come on up if you wouldn't mind saying your name and address for the record.
Absolutely. Tim Ayan, 3429 Benjamin Street, Northeast. I don't know if that is visible. I'll put a picture up here of what the design looks like. It's a little tough to tell, but to the council member's question of what are we talking about is this portion right here, that little bit of roof right there. So I would like to address the points that were made. As mentioned before, we're doing a pilot project. My firm, TE Studio, is pioneering passive house construction in the Twin Cities. We're the first architects to do this in Minneapolis. We are huge proponents of the Climate Action Plan. We support that wholeheartedly. I've been personally lobbying the city for 15 years or longer to engage in these activities, and now I'm spending my family's money on doing so. We have project partners at the city, including the Department of Sustainability, the Health Department, and CPED, including some of the members here in the room. And together, we embarked on the journey to construct a demonstration home, a pilot project. And so we've had a journey of many conversations, design reviews, ideas, all sorts of things, and had good support on making this project happen as designed. The building revolves around a few key approaches, carbon neutrality and energy performance being one of them. Without going too deep, it requires the building to be oriented, shaped, and set just so on a property to maximize passive solar heat gain as one component. Sheltering it from the north side, we're using the low-slung garage building to actively do that, which gives the building a further performance boost. We're also demonstrating stormwater management and accessibility with this project, which are other key aspects that help demonstrate a best practice approach. And again, the layout on site, for us to get the stormwater off the roof into rain gardens front and rear required a certain placement, and with that, channeling of water to those locations. And the accessibility part here is such that the entries are all zero step, and therefore they need to be structurally covered so that we keep debris, water, ice, snow off of them. I want to speak about the front porch in detail a little bit more. So what is referred to as a carport was conceived of as a front porch, not a carport. The carport function, or is a function of the fact that there is no alley access, and thereby the driveway traverses this space. But it was always designed as a drop-off point that is sheltered during all seasons and also covers these entries. The parking function and in the garage and outside has been minimized. We designed the house to only have a single car stall or width stall. It's deeper to detract from vehicle parking. So some of the findings that were made are actually completely counter to what the design intended to do. We're trying to minimize the impact. We set the garage back on purpose, and there's plenty of precedent in the neighborhood for garages that are out in front and center. We're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to create a safe space to arrive, to leave, a space for gathering and activity. We want to be good stewards, the best stewards. That's why we've come forward with this project. And so this has become that sticking point. So stormwater management, accessibility, and then the performance of the house are driving this design. Durability, I also want to mention again, these doors need to be covered. The side entrance to the house is effectively the garage door. To minimize the frontage of the garage, we opted out of having a person door and an overhead door. We're just using one door, makes it narrower. And so we're effectively covering our side door with this. And so it does double duty. It's a multi-purpose space. I want to give you a couple of images here, because we're talking about the character of the neighborhood. This is our next door neighbor, and you can see the arrangement is very similar in the sense that the garage is attached next to the house and it's set back from the front of the home. The only difference there is they don't have it covered, so they don't have a sheltered and covered entry and a safe access to the building throughout the seasons. So we feel that we meet that. Some other examples, this is all within a 2 to 3 block radius. A little bit tough to spot, but there's a carport right there, and that's all it does. Somebody built a lean-to on their house. They have a boat and cars in there. That is not what we're doing. That is not the intent of this design. Just 1 block over from our structure, you find this, which is a combination of a carport with a walkout terrace balcony on top of it with 0 setback to the neighbor. So these are existing conditions in our neighborhood. 1 block up from our house, you find this beauty right here. And so if we're talking about, the design and the character of the neighborhood, I have to say, I think, we spent a little bit more time thinking about it than these people did. And that got permitted and built, obviously. Our current next door neighbor on the same block, similar idea here. You have a garage way out forward of the house, way out forward of anybody. There's not even enough setback to the street right here so that they can park in front of their garage. And that is used as a living roof up above. So there's a terrace activity out there, which is completely out of character for the neighborhood. And it got built and it's sitting there. So there's plenty of examples. Couple other points I want to make. Front porch versus carport. If you've read the report from the variance hearing, which by the way took an hour, which is uncommon, a point was made that we're having an issue of terminology. The carport is not clearly defined. We asked for a written explanation of what a carport is. That was not presented neither prior nor during that hearing. And so, calling it a carport is one opinion. Like I said, designed it was as a front porch, and it serves those functions. And everything that it does is a function of property not having alley access, design minimizing the hardscape, and doing stormwater management, sheltered arrival, 0-step entry, as I mentioned before. If deemed a front porch, it is a permitted obstruction into the setback. We can call it a walkway, a porte cochere, drop-off point. All of those things, I think, are fair descriptions, and as such, a variance is actually not needed for this. And then also, in terms of the ordinance, without a clear description of a carport, we argue that variance then in that case is not necessary. And so these are the points that I wanted to highlight as part of that. I also want to stress that the zoning department find that it does not, in fact, have any significant impact on my neighbors or the use or enjoyment of anybody on the property or around the property, and it doesn't impact health, safety, and welfare. So without those findings, we feel there's no harm done in building it as intended and letting this pilot project become a beacon for the city of Minneapolis, which it was intended to be. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this point, I'll open the hearing to other members of the public. If anyone's interested in speaking, just know that we'll limit your comments to 2 minutes per person, and we'll be tracking that at the clock by the clerk. If you can come up and say your name and address for the record.
Good morning. My name is Amy Ayan. I'm Tim's wife, property owner. I think Tim did a pretty good job thoroughly discussing all the points that we had to say. I would just also, to the point of the neighborhood, the fabric of the neighborhood, and how people are responding to this. It's been an interesting journey. Tim is also part of the construction project at the moment, and the amount of people that stop by on a regular basis to comment and who are intrigued by this type of building that's different is incredible. We've gotten to know a lot of people just in this span of construction that we have been through so far. People are just incredibly intrigued by this. They're excited to see something positive happen with the neighborhood. We've even had people say, you should start a GoFundMe project. This is such an improvement from what was there before. People would probably be happy to contribute. It's so amazing what you're doing. So I just wanted to let you know the amount of enthusiasm for this project that we hear on a daily basis is great. It would be wonderful also to, close this up and also get the city's support as well as, in the same way that the neighborhood is supporting this. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else interested in speaking? Anyone else? Seeing no one, the hearing is now closed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the points in terms of what findings we would have to support a variance have been well explained in the presentation by the applicant or the appellant. I'll just emphasize one key point. This was an intentional experiment that was driven by our goals of trying to say, okay, we have a code that's been informed over the years for certain objectives. Well, what if the objective was maximum energy efficiency, something that I think is quite urgent? What would the code do in response to that? And so the question was, don't try to fit it in the existing code. Show us what the most energy efficient building can be on a typical site in a typical neighborhood. That experiment was, of course, achieved through Tim Ian's work, and I now think that we do not want to go backwards when we now have a model of how we can go forwards. So if it's a carport or not a carport, to me it's, do we care about carports or we care about energy efficiency? I side with energy efficiency. I'm going to move that we support the variance.
Good call on staff.
Chairman Schroeder, Councilmember Reich. I'd just like to respond to those comments as I was in some of those meetings. And I appreciate the client's patience with the process. I do think that what we've seen today on the first variance, some struggle staff kind of has applying the code sometimes with our customers. This one was a little different. It was very engaging. I think with the adoption of the 2040 plan, we're going to just kind of highlight some of the interregnum period that we're in where we're struggling with the existing code and aspirations. So for instance, on our first code, we talked a lot about tree preservation and the tree canopy. Trees were a virtue. But when you have a passive solar project, in certain circumstances, a tree can be a vice. And so staff is kind of having to shift our perspective. We have existing codes and we're trying to look through a lens, and it puts staff in a challenging position. Is it a carport? Is it a drop zone? So I just want to acknowledge that Councilmember Reich's comments about we've got a lot of aspirations. We're kind of in the process of getting code around that and getting them into the zoning code, but we have to bring forward-thinking projects under the existing code, and it sometimes hamstrings staff with our recommendations. So I just want to appreciate the applicant's patience and acknowledge the comments of Councilmember Reich. So I'd leave it at that, and I'm open to questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Director. I also just want to echo the Director's comments of thank you so much for I felt your frustration, and I very much appreciate bringing a project like this forward. Like we talked about the Climate Action Plan, we have so far to go, and we're going to need so many more projects like this to meet our goals. With that, Councilmember Reich's motion is before us. All those in favor, Council President Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whoa, sorry. I feel like compelled to say publicly for the record that I think we had two very unique situations in front of us today that happened to have the same theme, but in no way does this mean that the city council wants people to start building projects before they have the proper permits. And I think, in both of these cases, it sounds like there was just like a logical and reasonable explanation for what happened. But in the future, we want people to come to the counter, and we want people to engage with our staff and make sure that they are building something that's fitting within our rules. And if it isn't, then, I think engaging with leadership of the department like this project did and things like that I think that will become more common, as you said, Mr. Bohr and Councilmember Reich referred to, as we're implementing our new vision. We're going to run into these regulatory hurdles, and we're kind of in this, I think it's going to take years. Anyway, thanks, guys.
Is there an opportunity for a comment?
Maybe after. I think I would let us vote yes and then move on. I would take the win. All right, Councilmember Reich's motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. Seeing no other, yeah, we're done. Thanks.